If you have ever lived in Jamaica, you might know that this country is seriously affected by the so-called brain drain. Jamaica is not the only place with this problem, but what makes Jamaica different are the reasons why this is happening and the scale of this brain drain. If you're new here, my name is Irina, I'm originally from Ukraine, and one of the best decisions I ever made in my life was relocating to Jamaica about 9 years ago. However, before we came here, my husband and I had no connections in Jamaica whatsoever. We had no family here, no friends, no property, no job offers, nothing. We didn't even know how great Jamaican food was. But I simply made a list of all the countries in the world and applied the criteria I had for the best country for us to live. Unexpectedly, number 1, Jamaica popped up. One of the first videos on this channel explains how that happened. But here's a question. If Jamaica is so great, why are Jamaicans leaving? There are a few answers on the surface, like Jamaicans find better opportunities elsewhere, but why is this the case? Why a foreigner like me sees opportunities in Jamaica and Jamaicans don't? What's going on? This video is sponsored by you. Thank you so much for the support. First, the good news. During the last 50 years, the brain drain in Jamaica has actually been reducing. Today, it's only a half from what it used to be. The bad news, it's still one of the highest in the world in comparison to other places. And the thing is, while doing the research for this video, I noticed that each time the topic of the brain drain comes up in Jamaican media, the focus is always on there is something wrong with Jamaica. Some point at the crime issue, others blame the economic stability, the lack of jobs, and so on and so forth. But there are countries that are much poorer than Jamaica and have even less job opportunities. Some have a much worse situation with crime, like El Salvador, for example. Yet none of these countries have so many people leaving like Jamaica has, as a percentage of their population. So again, what's going on? The roots of everything, of course, lie deep in the history of migration in the Caribbean. But before we get to that, let's start with where Jamaica fits in the world context when it comes to immigration. The highest number of migrants in the world originally come not from China, as some might think, but from India. This country is the leader of migrants in absolute numbers by far, with almost 18 million Indians who live outside of their home country. Then come Mexico, Russia, and China, with over 10 million people each. However, we should keep in mind the population of these countries. For example, even though India is the leader in migration in absolute numbers, these 18 million Indians who left India still represent only 1.3% of the total population of India, meaning almost 99% of Indians still live in India. And this tendency is very typical for most countries in the world. In the first video about migration, I mentioned that there were 281 million international migrants in the world in 2020, which seems a lot until you realize that it's only 3.6% of the global population. This means that migrants are still a tiny minority. This map shows that the great majority of people stay where they were born. In fact, there is only a handful of countries that are exceptions to these rules. One of them happens to be Jamaica. Let me share some data for net migration. Net migration is basically people coming into the country minus people leaving the country, and the result we get represents net migration. For instance, here's a graph for Australia. This is a country that encourages foreigners to come and live there, so we see that the numbers of net migration are very high, plus 235,000 people. Now, if we add Jamaica to this graph, you'll see that the numbers are negative. This is because there are more people leaving Jamaica than there are coming. From the days of independence of Jamaica, the largest waves of immigration were in the 60s and the 80s. But then the numbers have been gradually reducing. This is not because more foreigners are coming to live in Jamaica, but only because less Jamaicans are leaving. This data is to confirm what I said in the beginning of the video. The brain drain from Jamaica has been reducing significantly. However, despite this good news, Jamaica is still one of the top 20 countries in the world with the highest number of emigrants as the percentage of its population. Currently, over 1 million people who were born in Jamaica left the country and live elsewhere at this point in time. Now, this number does not represent the whole Jamaican diaspora. The diaspora also includes the children and grandchildren who were born in other countries. So the total estimate for Jamaican diaspora is about 3 million people. While this exact number shows how many people were born in Jamaica but don't live here anymore. Remember I mentioned India with their 18 million migrants who still correspond to only 1.3% of Indian population. Now look at Jamaica with its 1.1 million migrants that correspond to almost 40% of the current population in Jamaica. But who do you think are the other 19 countries with the highest percentage of immigrants? Number one is Dominica with 109%, meaning there are more people who were born in Dominica and left the island than there are people who currently live in Dominica. Number two, St. Kitts and Nevis. Just look at the list. It's full of small island nations, especially countries of the Caribbean, with St. Lucia, Jamaica, and Barbados closely following each other. Here's a map that shows the total number of immigrants and emigrants in each country. As you see, there are more people leaving the region than there are foreigners coming to live here. However, not all Caribbean nations are equally affected by the brain drain. It's actually the English-speaking Caribbean that are affected the most, which is not accidental. There is evidence that about 25% of modern-day Jamaicans can claim the Irish ancestry. In fact, the Irish is the largest ethnic group in Jamaica after all the African ethnic groups. I've personally found it to be quite surprising because I thought it would be the English or Chinese or Indian, but no, it's the Irish. And because it's not often discussed in the media, I decided to do further research. And here's a little announcement. I didn't miss anything. I actually went to Ireland and interviewed the members of the Jamaican diaspora as well as the Irish historians. I also visited the Irish Emigration Museum in Dublin, where among other notable people of Irish descent, you can see the very first Prime Minister of Jamaica, Sir Alexander Bustamante, whose grandfather was born in Ireland. I'm still working on this documentary, but now filming the parts in Jamaica. So if there are any members of the Irish diaspora here in Jamaica and you'd like to be featured, please get in touch with me using this email as soon as possible. For everyone else, the episode about the link between Jamaica and Ireland is coming up on this channel soon, so please make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you won't miss it when it comes out. Now back to migration. The first wave of immigration from Jamaica was to the Central America, especially Panama and Costa Rica. This began almost immediately after the abolition of apprenticeship in 1830s because of constitutional changes that removed the restrictions to free movement that had been in place before. Jamaican migrants were among the main labor force for the construction projects that were going on in the Central America at the time, like the Trans-Isthmus Railway, later the cutting of the Panama Canal, and they were also employed in agricultural operations of the United Fruit Company. In the early 20th century, Jamaicans also migrated to Cuba to provide labor for the expansion of their sugar production. But those early Jamaican immigrants, the workers, They kept coming back to Jamaica, and those return flows of migrants from Central America were significant until the mid-20th century. This could have been the end of the story if not for the events that began in Europe. Because of the First and Second World Wars, British requirements for labor and manpower led to the recruitment of workers from Jamaica and other Caribbean colonies, which grew to even a larger scale in the post-Second World War period. The reconstruction of Western Europe in general and the United Kingdom in particular required a lot of labor, much of which was obtained from Jamaica. HMT Empire Windrush arrived in June 1948. She carried 1,027 passengers from the Caribbean. A lot of them were from Jamaica. Even though there were other ships before and after this one, this particular ship and its passengers gained a symbolic status as the start of what's now known the Windrush generation. They are the people who began the large Jamaican diaspora in the United Kingdom. However, by 1962, at the time when Jamaica gained independence, the United Kingdom implemented restrictive immigration policies, which made it more difficult to relocate to the UK. But this coincided with legislation changes in the 1960s, both in the US and Canada, which altered regulations of migrant entry in favor of selectivity according to the required skills and education, rather than on previous grounds of nationality and race. These changes to immigration legislation made in these three countries had huge implications for Jamaican immigration. Firstly, the trend in the direction of migrant flow shifted from Western Europe to North America, where the United States became the chief destination, followed by Canada. And secondly, the selectivity of migrants on the basis of occupation led to a marked increase in the migration of skilled labor and professionals. As a result, even though Jamaicans can be found in many countries in the world, it is these three countries that have the largest Jamaican diaspora. All these historical events, from as far as colonization of Jamaica by the English in 1655 to the Second World War and the legislation changes in the US and Canada, set the main base for why Jamaica and a few other Caribbean countries ended up in this situation with some of the highest levels of brain drain. So now let's look at the actual reasons. When scientists analyze the reasons for migration, they always look at two sets of factors. Push factors that push people away from their country of birth. They can include things like war, disasters, poverty and such. And pull factors that pull people to a new country and include things like, better opportunities. Earlier, I mentioned when the topic of brain drain comes up in Jamaica, it's mostly focused on what's happening in Jamaica itself. The lack of jobs, low salaries, safety issues, and so on. Basically, the focus is only on the push factors. And the discussion usually ends with what the government of Jamaica should do about this, how to prevent Jamaicans from leaving. The government is indeed trying to do all sorts of things. For instance, there are bilateral agreements between the governments of Jamaica and the host governments of the United States and Canada for seasonal labor contracts. The idea behind this is that Jamaicans who lack education or professional training would go to these countries as short-term labor to gain skills and bring these skills back to Jamaica. There are also non-government organizations that are willing to finance education for younger people, and in turn, these younger people will have to work for a certain number of years for these organizations. These initiatives are supported by the government because they are viewed as a way to create and keep young, skilled professionals in the country. There are also suggestions being made by Jamaican scholars that the country must try to create a sense of patriotism, especially in its tertiary education. These examples are just to point out that there are ways to address the brain drain problem internally, and these waves are being implemented both by the government of Jamaica and the private sector. However, all these things are just addressing the push factors while completely ignoring the other important side of this story, the pull factors of the United States, which happens to be the largest economy in the world. When it comes to immigration, in most countries, it is a complex combination of both push and pull factors that influence people's decision to immigrate, because these factors are interrelated usually. However, there can be exceptions. An extreme example of such exceptions can be Syria or Bosnia and Herzegovina. Both of these countries were exclusively influenced by a push factor, the war. It resulted in mass immigration, and the main goal for these people was just to leave their countries to save their lives. And it's not like they were choosing a destination per se with best opportunities or something like that. When it comes to Jamaica, the situation is reversed because it is rather a rare case of a country that is mostly influenced by the pull factors, not by what's happening in Jamaica itself as such. There was a study done which features the reasons of immigration. Various factors can be seen there, but the main ones are people are pulled by the higher living standards and economic opportunities of these largest economies. So no matter what Jamaica does, it cannot directly compete with the job market in the US, Canada, or the UK. And this is where you might have a question. But what about the other countries? None of them can compete with the US job market, yet we don't see such high levels of immigration there, not even from our neighbors like the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Cuba. And this is because all these reports are often missing a very important factor. See for yourself, if you want one main reason to blame for high brain drain from Jamaica, this reason is English. Not the people, the language. Imagine there is a hospital in the United States that has a shortage of nurses, and there is a nurse from the Dominican Republic who doesn't speak a word of English, and a nurse from Jamaica with English as her native language. Provided both have the same skills, who's gonna get the job? That's not even a choice, is it? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's say you're from Ukraine and you're a highly skilled engineer. So you decide to relocate to Canada because of the opportunities. What kind of a job position can you get there? Maybe you can wash the dishes or clean rooms? Because your engineering skills and talents mean absolutely nothing unless you're also fluent in English at the level of a native speaker. Jamaican talented engineers, on the other hand, don't have to spend years of their life washing dishes while studying a foreign language. They can go for engineering right away. The language barrier is one of the main reasons that prevents people from migrating. It should never be underestimated how hard it is to learn a foreign language to the level of a native speaker. So even though a lot of people all over the world are pulled to these biggest economies that happen to be English-speaking countries, and they want to get jobs there, but they don't speak English, so they cannot. American and Canadian governments know that, so when they have shortages for all sorts of skilled labor, they start the search for this labor not in Poland, China, or Mexico. They go straight to the Anglophone Caribbean. And in terms of population, Jamaica is the largest of them all. And that's why we see these nations at the top of the list. If Jamaica remained under the Spanish rule, Jamaicans would have been a Spanish-speaking nation, and the language barrier would have prevented our country from having such a high level of brain drain like it does for Dominican Republic or Cuba or other Latin American countries. But the events of 1655, when Jamaica was made a English colony, changed that, making it easier for Jamaicans now because they are English speakers. And this brings me to reason number 2 that is hardly ever discussed, and that's diaspora. Every single Jamaican I meet on the island has a relative or a close friend who lives in the US, Canada, or the UK. It is so common in Jamaica to have a relative who lives abroad that Jamaicans don't seem to realize that this is not how the rest of the world works. Why does it matter? Well, imagine if you have to go to a country where you know absolutely nobody, even if there is no language barrier. You need to do tons of research on, which town to choose, how to find a place to rent, how to pay your bills, the best places to get food, clothes, schools for your kids, and so on. All of these things make relocation to a foreign country extremely difficult. But for Jamaicans, all of these things have already been solved by the diaspora years ago. Don't get me wrong, migration in general is never easy, but it is easier for Jamaicans because of the well-established diaspora than it is for people from other countries. So the origins of the brain drain from Jamaica to the UK comes from the consequences of the World War II and the Windrush generation. The origins for the brain drain from Jamaica to the US and Canada comes from the changes of the legislations in those countries in the 60s that were directly aimed at talented, skilled and educated migrants from Jamaica and other Anglophone Caribbean. As a result, those Jamaicans built very strong diasporas, and now it's like a snowball effect. More Jamaicans can be pooled much easier because there is already an established community there. And this brings me to reason number 3, the culture of migration. It is persistent in many Caribbean countries, but it is especially so in Jamaica. It's the image of migration itself. In Jamaica, it is associated with successfulness and prosperity. And it sits firmly in the mentality of many different social groups in Jamaica. It's not because the locals don't like Jamaica. Many of them do. They are patriotic. It's just that there is this idea that if you want to have a good life or make good money, better you go foreign. Now, this is not my opinion. It's the result of the studies I found in the report by the United Nations. But here's my opinion now. How's any of this stuff that is being done about the push factors in Jamaica is going to help with any of these? It's not. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be doing this, it's just that it's not going to solve the brain drain. That's why I think it makes no sense to blame Jamaica for its brain drain, like the government or just average Jamaicans, making young people feel guilty for not contributing to the development of Jamaica and force them to stay when they think better opportunities are there. I think the main focus should be on showing the opportunities we have in Jamaica so people are inspired and excited about building their life here. Sure, Jamaica can never compete with the US job market, but it doesn't have to, because Jamaica has a lot of other advantages that the US doesn't have. I'm not only talking about the climate, the culture, the vibes, but also lifestyle and socioeconomic side of things, because all of these years of brain drain combined with economic growth because of tourism and remittances from those who left, which would be discussed in a separate video, Jamaica now has a market where the demand for quality goods and services exceeds the supply, while the competition is rather low. It's a paradise for any entrepreneurs, small, medium, and large. It's just a matter of time who's going to take advantage of these opportunities. The Jamaicans in Jamaica, the Jamaicans in the diaspora, or some foreigners. Jamaicans are leaving the island not because there is something wrong with Jamaica. They're leaving because there is everything right. They speak the right language, they have the right education and training, they have the right support from their diaspora, and Jamaica is a free upper middle income country where people can afford to make a decision about immigration. Jamaicans are leaving for better opportunities elsewhere, but that's not because there are no opportunities in Jamaica. It's because they don't know about them. That's why I thought it was a good idea to have this channel. I'm trying to use my platform to show these opportunities, feature businesses and professionals in Jamaica to set examples so people can be inspired by them and use them for their own ideas. None of this would have been possible without the team of our patrons. Huge thanks for your continued support. You are the people who allow me to focus not only on the beauty of Jamaica, but also do some deep research for the important topics like this one. If you're not our patron, but you also want to contribute to our work financially, you can do so from only $5 a month. Thanks to everyone for watching. If you have found this video useful, please don't forget to give it a like and of course, share it with your friends. Thank you once again, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.